right, welcome back everyone. Thank you for coming. Now we are going to do the Senate debate. These are the candidates running for State Senator, Hampshire, Franklin, Worcester. So to the stage, we have Joe Comerford. David Morin. Ryan O'Donnell. Steve Connor. Chelsea Kline. And Dave Murphy. So we are going to start in this order with 3-minute opening statements. So Joe, you may begin.
Thank you so much to the students for organizing, the voters of the future for organizing tonight and calling us here. Thanks to my fellow candidates, it's really good to be with you, and thanks to all of you for coming. You really are the heart of democracy. I learned that Stan Rosenberg had stepped aside via texts and voicemails as I was on my way home from a MoveOn strategic retreat. I led the retreat for 100 of my colleagues, and we focused in part on how essential it is for this year to fill state legislatures with strategic, experienced fighters, with organizers who could help move a people-focused agenda forward, especially now when we face so many attacks on the federal level. And that night, as people contacted me about Stan, they were asking me to run for Stan's seat. Now, I've always wanted to serve. My parents were public school educators. My dad was a high school teacher. He's here tonight. And he instilled in me a love of participatory democracy. My aunt was a sister of St. Joseph, and I spent many weekends with her. And she worked with Dolores Huerta and with Cesar Chavez on people's movements for justice. So when I got calls about this race on the heels of the deep conversations we were having, and about what was needed at the state level, I decided I would walk the walk. So let me just share a few milestones on my journey to this evening. As part of my graduate school work and social work, I led a national campaign called Mothers in Prison, Children in Crisis, and that campaign was calling attention to the disproportionate impact of mass incarceration on mothers, on women of color and their children. That's the first time I came to Massachusetts. The Western Massachusetts, but I came back in the 90s to lead a crisis intervention outreach team with the Center for Human Development. And at CHD, my team focused on mental health care, poverty, homelessness, addiction, which hits close to home, recovery, and the cycle of incarceration. And we helped break that cycle of incarceration. I worked at AFSC on raising the minimum wage and on closing the Mount Tom power plant. And at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, I worked on food security, both meeting the immediate demands of hunger in this region and then also working to eradicate hunger, which is absolutely possible with the right policy. I became the executive director of National Priorities, where we cracked open federal budgets so that lawmakers at the state and local levels could help make their voices heard about the priorities of our nation. And then at MoveOn, I worked as an organizer to move people power, on guns, on Muslim ban, on defending the DREAM Act. And it was there that I decided I wanted to put all my skills together, my policy, my expertise, and my organizing, and bring it inside government, which is what I hope to do with your support. Thank you so much.
David.
Hi everyone, my name's David Morin. I'm running for the Senate. I'm thrilled to say that, and I thank the organizers and I thank my fellow candidates. We have a very great set of candidates, a great field of candidates, and I would be very happy to support any one of them for this seat. So thank you to the organizers. As an activist and civic leader, I helped organize a city council candidates forum, and it is certainly not easy. This is something on a much larger scale, and it's extremely impressive. And I think that it says a lot about the community and the future, and about the community of Northampton. I'm so happy to be here. I have a long history in Northampton. My mom owned and operated a vintage clothing store, better yet vintage clothing, on Market Street. It was not on Market Street for 27 years, but it was in Northampton for 27 years, on Pleasant Street, on Main Street. She was actually next to Peter Laird, who created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is pretty cool. And so growing up, I spent a lot of time here, and I love it here, and I keep coming back. So thank you for having me. The reason that I'm running for the state senate is because we need a new generation of leadership in this state and in our country. I'm absolutely aghast by what's going on at the national level, both in the executive branch and in the legislature and in the courts. And we really need change, and it's not going to happen if it doesn't start somewhere. So I'm running for the state senate to change the dynamics in Boston in terms of money and politics. I have made a pledge to not accept any campaign donations from any other people apart from myself. I'm entirely self-funding my campaign, which is extremely difficult considering that I don't have a lot of money. I do need to eat, I do need to have a roof over my head, but I think it's absolutely critical that a state senator have no obligations, owe no favors, and have no preferences for absolutely anyone. I did not appoint a treasurer to my campaign committee, which is proof of this, and I did not appoint a campaign committee. So it's me, and I'm going to be working. I'm going to be going door to door. I'm going to be talking to hopefully each and every one of you. I imagine that you're all very active voters. So again, I really do appreciate being here, and I hope that that the students and the community agree with me that if not me, it's going to have to be some of us. So thank you.
Brian.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's nice to be at Hamp High. Thank you to the organizers of this event. Really, all the civic energy in the city of Northampton has emanated from this building, or young people in general, ever since, well, for a while, but certainly this year with the Pioneer Valley March for Our Lives, and now organizing this event. So I want to recognize that and say thank you. My name is Ryan O'Donnell. I'm the president of the city council here in the city of Northampton. When I think about this district and this moment in time, I think about essentially a total wipeout of representation for Western Massachusetts. Starting with Stan Rosenberg, a great progressive legislator who I admire, stepping down. Of course, tragically, Peter Kokot's passing, and the previous retirement of Ellen Story and others. I have concerns that a region that already struggles, that is already easily neglected in Boston, is going to be put in a very difficult situation. And I strongly think that the person that we choose for the position of state senator has to be ready on day one to stand up for our communities and for the ideals that matter to our communities. This part of the world, Western Mass, is my home. This is where I'm from. This is where my heart is. I grew up in the town of Amherst. I grew up in affordable housing. I was raised by a single mother who worked as a secretary at UMass and was also a public school teacher for many years. And her public service, being a teacher is public service, helped to inspire me in my life. And after I graduated from UMass in 2002, I was briefly John Ulver's intern in DC, which was a great honor. And I then worked for a series of nonprofits doing work I really believe in. I worked for a group called Fair Vote on election reform and automatic voter registration. I was the executive director of a state chapter of Common Cause, which worked to get money out of politics and ensure integrity and ethics and transparency in government. So I was an activist and I was an organizer. And when I came back home, I was sort of on the other side after I got involved in the city council. And on the city council, you're in a little legislature. You have to take tough votes. You have to build consensus with your colleagues. And I'm proud of writing legislation that I hope I get a chance to talk about tonight, building support for it and getting my colleagues to vote for it. It's why I'm proud to be endorsed not just by other local officials like myself, Molly Keegan of the Hadley Select Board, councilors like Jean-Louise Shera and Elisa Kline in Northampton, but also State Representative John Syback of South Hadley. Public service to me is translating our ideals into action. What I admired about Stan Rosenberg, what I admired about Peter Kokot is that they could do that. It's not just about taking positions on issues, it's about getting results for the ideals that matter in our community.
Steve.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Steve Connor. I grew up in Florence as the youngest of four, and like many NHS students, I was lucky enough to grow up in Northampton. I went through the public schools from kindergarten through graduation right here at Hamp High. I later got my bachelor's degree over at UMass Amherst. My mother was my first feminist role model. She was our family's primary breadwinner at a time when that was not the norm. She was a registered nurse at Cooley Dickinson for more than 43 years. It made my family life a little different than my friends, but I learned valuable life lessons from that. My experience taught me women are strong individuals who can raise a family if they choose and work in their chosen career field. Family and community supports are key to their success. I also learned that women are paid less than men and saw my mother's battle for equity as a member of her nursing union. It also taught me my fathers and all men can be primary care providers for their children. My father used to get teased by his buddies because he always had to babysit us so much. He was fine with it, he loved it, and he loved us, and he did a good job taking care of us. There should be flexibility of gender roles. We should not accept limitations based on gender expectations for any other gender as well. The neighborhood I grew up in Florence was politically diverse, but whoever you voted for, whether conservative or progressive, our neighbors always watched out for each other. This had a powerful impact on my development, and it has formed my political beliefs about living in the Commonwealth. We belong to each other. Even when we disagree, we need to look out for each other if we are to sustain and revive the American democracy that traces its roots right back here to Massachusetts. The neighbors we need to look out for are those we have marginalized within our community, which is why my campaign is about putting people first. Our neighbors are homeless and struggling to survive day to day and have often experienced trauma as children or in young adulthood. Approximately 70% of adults report having gone through trauma. I am one of those 70%. The difference between our homeless neighbors, which I speak of, and myself is I had the support of family, friends, and community services to help me make it through. I've seen the way the student body at NHS strives to look out for each other, the students' commitments to being a welcoming and inclusive school. You can continue to be integral parts by continuing to be vocal when you witness our marginalized populations and when you see an injustice occur. I am impressed with the types of committees that are represented here and that are part of your everyday academic life. I look forward to hearing your questions.
Chelsea.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. And thank you to the student organizing groups. Awesome job. My name is Chelsea Kline. I use she, her pronouns, and I am running for state senate to be a strong progressive voice for Western Massachusetts and a champion for working families and small businesses and underrepresented communities. For the past 6 years, I've been a leader in higher education, overseeing multiple academic programs for adult female college students. I saw how much my students struggled. I saw them struggle with food insecurity, housing insecurity, fear of deportation. I even had students that were living out of their cars while they tried to finish their degrees. I saw every day how our systems are letting people down. And I know firsthand what it means to struggle. I was a low-income single-teen mother. I needed to rely on food stamps to put food on the table, to raise my child, and to take care of things. I went to community college, and then I transferred to Smith College, where I earned my degree. And then I went on to Harvard Divinity School, where I got a master's in theological studies. Through it all, I worked multiple jobs and tried to make ends meet. So we have some really wonderful candidates in the race, obviously. And it seems that we really agree on many of the policies, from what I can tell so far. And what sets me apart is my lived experience. I know what it means to be vulnerable. I know what it means to really struggle. So when I'm advocating for our values, I bring my story with me. It's a lot harder to dismiss suffering or to blame people who are vulnerable when the marginalized people are no longer invisible. So I thank you, and I look forward to tonight's conversation.
And finally, Dave.
I'm Dave Murphy. I grew up in Amherst, and I live in Amherst. My mother, who is here this evening, has lived in Northampton for the past 37 years. I'm running for state senate because with the resignation of Stan Rosenberg, the passing of Peter Kokot, the retirement of Ellen Story, John Syback, and Stephen Kulik, we are losing a combined almost 100 years of legislative experience for this district. Western Mass tends to get forgotten on Beacon Hill, and we need somebody who knows the district, but also who knows how to get things done on Beacon Hill. I've spent 20 of the last 25 years working in public service to improve the lives of the people in Massachusetts. After I graduated from Amherst Regional High School in 1989, I went to Skidmore College and graduated in 1993. Then I worked for Mario Cuomo, who was governor of New York. And afterwards, I went to work for Senator Ted Kennedy on Capitol Hill, where I worked on the federal assault weapons ban. I then went to work at the U.S. Department of Justice during the Clinton administration, where I worked on implementation of the Brady Handgun Control Act. And I later worked at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Homicide Unit under the direction of Robert Mueller. After law school, I moved back to Massachusetts and clerked for the Superior Court. Then I worked at a Boston law firm, and then Stan Rosenberg helped me get my first job on Beacon Hill, where I worked as general counsel to Senator Harriet Chandler. I also worked for Senator Mark Montigny. In the 5 years that I spent working on Beacon Hill, we worked to expand access to health care and dental care for the disadvantaged. We also successfully fought against the ban on gay marriage. To enshrine discrimination in the Constitution is not only wrong, it's un-American. Later, I worked on implementation and enactment of the Healthcare Reform Act, where my boss, Senator Montigny, was able to get a $54 million amendment included in the Senate bill. This made the issue, what we did was we expanded access to Medicaid for millions of people in the Commonwealth and made the issue non-conferenceable so that we matched the House funding in the House bill and it made it into the law. I also drafted the bill that later became the Massachusetts Anti-Human Trafficking Act. Then I went to work for Governor Deval Patrick as the legislative director at the Department of Children and Families, where we fought to protect children throughout the Commonwealth, and where we worked on enactment of comprehensive child welfare reform and enactment of the Anti-Human Trafficking Act that the governor signed into law. I have more to say, but I see that my time is up, and I want to thank the students for putting this forum on, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thanks.
All right, so now we are going to move on to questions. So we're doing them in the same order that we did last time. So we're going to start with the Democrats Club.
All right, hi, I'm Ethan. I'm a junior, and I'm back with another Democrats question. So, education funding has a direct impact on our future. While charter schools pull funding out of the public elementary and secondary school systems, the costs of tuition to public universities in this state remain among the highest in the nation. How will you allocate and distribute money to the public schools for both K-12 and higher education?
And answering this question first is Dave, and then we'll go along the line.
You can call me Dave, but for purpose of distinction, that's fine. I'm very concerned about expansion of charter schools, sort of infringing on our local K through 12 institutions. And of course, public higher ed does need to be better funded. We are not at the best of the where we could be in terms of national averages of to what degree we fund our public higher education. I would just stress that we need to allocate or hopefully we should pass the fair share amendment would be the first thing, and then we could allocate additional funds toward both K through 12 and public higher ed. But I think we could also just sort of legislate without that even to perhaps raise some additional funds and then send that to our local communities for the purposes of education. Thank you.
So, well, here we are in a Northampton high school, and as a city councilor, I've voted on 5 budgets that contain school budgets. I can tell you that charter schools, since their institution 24 years ago, has cost the city of Northampton alone $24 million. Over the last 5 years, it's cost us about $10 million. And I'll discuss some of the ways you could fix the funding formula, but let me start by saying that in education, which is so fundamental to our society and our democracy, separate is not equal. Separate is not equal. And my concern is we're creating a two-tiered system in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts where public education was invented. When a student leaves a school, the money follows them, and the state is supposed to reimburse the public school district the difference. The reimbursement is required by statute, but doesn't actually happen. This, of course, is something that needs to be corrected, but at the end of the day, let's tax millionaires and raise revenue and invest it in our public school districts. We can make all the reforms in the world to charter schools. At the end of the day, we need to invest in education and higher ed. When I graduated UMass in 2002, state spending on higher ed has declined by about 15% since that time. It drives student debt and tuition and fees. It's going to be a big problem for a lot of you. We need to do something about it. Thank you.
Steve.
Hi, yes. Definitely, there's without question, and I think everybody on this panel would agree that the fair share amendment that we're asking for has to happen. The idea that we're still funding schools through our property taxes is archaic, and it has to end. I had children who were on IEPs and then later on a 504 plan. When it came time for him to get further up in his educational career without having one of those things, he really wished to go to PVPA. And I thought that was a great idea because of his learning style. The one thing that I didn't understand, and now I do, is how much money got taken out of the school district for my kid to be able to go to that other school. It made me think, well, wait a second. Why doesn't every kid come with that same price tag, no matter if they stay in the school they were in or they go to another school? My other 3 children all graduated, all went through the regular public school, and as a matter of fact, 2 of them graduated here from Northampton High. but it just told me that there's something wrong with our funding, that I'm hurting another school. So we have to change that formula drastically. The other thing is when you look at the university and understand that they're trying to lure out-of-state students to fully fund their operation, that's very telling. State funding has to change there as well. Thank you.
I also support the Fair Share Amendment. Oh, sorry, I'm quiet. And fully funding our public schools, updating the Chapter 70 formula. I also support ending high-stakes testing. Public schools really are the foundation of a more equitable, more engaged, and a more compassionate society. And that's really why we need to end high-stakes testing and focus on the whole child. I am proud to have the endorsement of the American Federation of Teachers. They represent thousands of teachers and educators across Massachusetts, which are fighting to end high-stakes testing and school privatization. I support universal pre-K, which is an early education which really breaks down generational poverty and helps every child succeed. I support a debt-free future for higher education, and I support free public higher education. And I support the Healthy Youth Act that will ensure that sex education is medically accurate, age-appropriate, and comprehensive. And I support making sure that our curriculum is LGBTQ inclusive, because every young person deserves access to the information that they need to make healthy decisions. And of course, we need more money to do all of this, and I will fight for that.
Education is the great equalizer in our society. If every student has the opportunity to get a good education and they have the opportunity to achieve their full potential and to succeed in this society. And education is my #1 priority. I've worked on 12 budgets in the State House, and we have a structural deficit in our state budget. We don't fund education like we should, and we need more resources in order to do so adequately. When it comes to charter schools, I come from the position, having been elected to 3 terms on the school committee in Natick, where, in my view, when we sent students to charter schools and that money came out of our budget, it was very difficult for us to balance the budget, losing those funds. But at the same time, I'm not going to begrudge a parent who wants to advocate for their child who has a learning style or a learning ability that would be better served in a different environment. So I think it's a difficult issue, but the ultimate solution to the question is we need more funding for education. We need to fund education in a different manner so that it's more equal, because effectively we have de facto segregation in our schools because we have de facto segregation in many of our communities, and that needs to change.
So public education is in my DNA. As I said before, I come from public school teachers. My sister is a public school librarian. My aunt was a public school social worker. These are my people. My wife is a public school teacher. She's on the school committee here in Northampton. We send our two kids to Jackson Street School. I helped build the playground at Jackson Street, raising about $300,000 with an amazing team of parents. I'm invested here in this community. So yes, we need more funding for public education. We need to, though, start back at pre-K and go all the way through the university. Right now, there are 511,000 young people, ages 3 and 4, living at 200% or more below poverty. Only 1/3 of them has access to pre-K. We know that pre-K is a predictor for health. It's a predictor for upward mobility. It's a predictor for later jobs. So I want to start in pre-K. Of course I want to fix the foundation budget and the funding formula. Of course I want to do that. I also want to invest at greater amounts, of course, on art and sciences, bringing them back into the public schools. And then with regard to university funding and community college, yes, I absolutely support a path to free higher public education. And I want to make sure that it's available to everyone in our community. Right now at UMass, for example, the funding has declined, as Ryan was saying, many percentage points, 32 over the last decade. I'm going to work to reverse that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now we have a question from the Environmental Club.
Hi, my name is Adia Bennett. I'm a sophomore at Northampton High School and a member of the Environmental Club. We are already beginning to see the effects of climate change, with storm seasons both long and more intense. For example, this past fall, Hurricanes Maria and Irma both devastated Puerto Rico, forcing many families to relocate to Massachusetts. What are the most important legislative steps that Massachusetts can take as a state in order to prepare for our climate future and combat rapid climate change?
Thank you for that question. On the City Council, I voted in favor of a resolution endorsing a piece of state legislation that would move Massachusetts to 100% renewable energy by 2030 in all sectors of the economy by 2050. The frame to answer your question is that climate change is an existential emergency. We cannot act fast enough on this issue. There are many different policy options, but the biggest ones are going to be, in my opinion, setting that goal to reach 100% renewable energy in our state, putting a price on carbon to cap it, and so if you do it correctly, you can actually rebate it to people. You can do two things. You put a price on carbon, you can rebate it to people to help them if they have economic challenges. But you can also take the revenue you raise from it and invest it in green infrastructure. One of the things I would like to do, if the Fair Share Amendment passes, you need to pass it, but then you need legislators to implement it. And I think the money that we spend on transportation, we should make sure is green transportation, because 25% of our carbon emissions come from the transportation sector in our cars. So that's another reason why we need east-west rail and more north-south rail. I think I've given you three things, but if there's one message that I'd like to say, and I think everyone agrees with this, it's time to act now on climate change. As your senator, I will.
What he said. No, exactly. There needs to be a carbon tax. One of the things that we're going to do with any kind of a tax that we get, an increase in funding, is we also need to plan on the low-lying areas of Massachusetts and what's going to happen as the ocean keeps continuing to rise. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of things going on there, and nobody's really figuring out the plans to handle that. They are in some places in this country, but I haven't heard a whole lot of it here in Massachusetts, and we need to plan for those kind of issues to take place. We need to go to 100% renewable. We need to look at the state and say, when people go to construct new housing, we should make sure that there's solar panels on top of those houses whenever possible, and that they are part of every building that we put up, especially all new public buildings. And we need to make sure that there may not be the most attractive things, but wind farms offshore, it's working out off of Block Island and Rhode Island. We need more of those. We need to do it. We need to get 100% renewable.
We don't get a second chance to protect our planet. We all know this. This is it. So we've got to take immediate action to protect our environment, to shift to renewable energy, and to strengthen our green economy. I am strongly in favor of the Environmental Justice Act. I believe that all people should be protected from the consequences of climate change, and the benefits of our environmental policies should be spread equitably. The rich should not be the only ones who benefit from investments in solar and wind, and the low-income people should not be the only ones who carry the disproportionate effects of poor planning decisions on the real impacts of climate change. I also really believe in investing in our farms. They are our allies in fighting climate change, and they're what keeps our community healthy and bring our local food, keep our food local. I really support solar access for all, and pushing for full energy credit and incentivizing providing solar access for all people. Thank you.
We have some of the greatest minds and the best institutions of higher education in the world in Massachusetts. And we need to partner with them, with the financial sector, and with climate change advocates to invest in clean and renewable energy technology. The nation and the state that leads in this industry will lead the world, not just in accomplishing environmental goals to reduce the effects of climate change, but they will also control the economic impact of this sector. In addition, we need to have a tax on carbon. We need to improve transportation because much of the pollution in Massachusetts results from transportation. So we need better public transportation, and we need to convert the public fleet to clean energy and electric. I think that we all recognize that this is an issue and we have a finite amount of time to address it. Personally, there are many of you who may choose to vote for Governor Baker because you think he's a nice guy, and he might be, but his environmental policies do not square with our values in this district, and so we need somebody else.
Like everyone here, I feel the urgency around climate change. I actually made 3 calls today because, as folks likely know, the Senate Energy Bill, it will be voted on tomorrow. And since we don't have representation, I called Senators Lesser, I called Senator Hines, I called Senator Spilker, and I asked them to please fight for a few specific pieces of that legislation. We have to never have pipeline expansion. We know it's not needed. There are study after study that says we do not need more pipelines through Massachusetts. We must have carbon pricing, and I support a green bank so that we can invest that money that we get from carbon pricing back into public transportation, back into new construction, back into helping people make their homes safer in terms of climate, right? Better. And I really support a renewable portfolio standard that forces energy companies, forces them to take more renewable energy and push it through to customers. Right now, they only have to put 1% of renewable energy out. This bill does not enough, friends. It's 3%. I'll fight for more. But can you imagine triple the amount of renewable energy? That's what this bill does. And it's an important piece of legislation. And call your senators tomorrow. Call these good folks tomorrow. Eric Lesser's in Springfield, and I'm sure he'll want your call, as will the others in this delegation. Thanks so much.
Hear, hear. I generally agree with the candidates' comments. I think that we absolutely need to take a more serious effort in protecting our environment. Absolutely no pipeline expansion. I want to have no fracking whatsoever, ever in this Commonwealth. We need to invest more in local clean transportation. The PVTA has been bringing around some electric buses, which are not polluting, and I think that that's a great step in the right direction. I think we need more funding for that. Wind energy, I mean, we had 4 entire towns that are no longer here because of the need to have water for Boston. I think that it's acceptable to have a safe and clean energy infrastructure. I think that some folks out on Martha's Vineyard might have to make some sacrifices in terms of the aesthetic appeal, perhaps. So I think we need, thank you. We need the most harsh penalties possible for polluters and increased oversight.
now be moving on to the question from the Feminist Collective.
Hi, my name is Serafina Foreman. I'm in 9th grade at Northampton High School, and I'm a member of Feminist Collective. So access to healthcare has diverse and personal effects on families in the Commonwealth. There will be a 2018 ballot question on implementing paid family medical leave on the state level, and several candidates here tonight have declared support for single-payer healthcare. Please comment on the current state of healthcare in Massachusetts. What needs to change or stay the same to best serve the citizens of the state?
And we're starting with Steve.
So, the state of healthcare in this state is, we've come a long way, and we were kind of the design for what became the national plan under President Obama. It didn't go far enough. It was a building block, and we were moving continually towards, I felt like, a single-payer system. Things changed in the State House, things changed in the White House, and it's been undermined a little bit. We have to kind of circle our wagons in Massachusetts, push the governor to make sure that we can move towards a single-payer healthcare system. I've talked with a bunch of legislators who thought that wasn't necessary and that we could keep fixing and adjusting things. And a few of them have completely changed their mind after what's been going on the last few years. We need single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all, however you want to put it, so that people have access to fair, appropriate, and thorough healthcare and great education on how to stay healthy in the state of Massachusetts. We will be a much better state once we get there.
Healthcare is a human right. I strongly support Medicare for all and the steps that will help us get there. This really is a big one, and this will really touch all of our lives. I grew up having to move around to get access to specialists for my brother for his specialized care, and I also had to move to help my mother with her cancer treatment. And I'm sure we all have similar stories. So I want us to think strategically about how to get there, and I really support legislation that would bring about single-payer benchmark. I support nursing safe staffing levels, and I support these changes will help patients stay safe and greatly reduce costly accidents and injuries in our healthcare system. I really support community hospitals. We need to pass fair community hospital pricing immediately. Our community hospitals are struggling because they just can't get reimbursed, and they get reimbursed less than the bigger institutions for the same exact procedures. And they care for higher risk communities, so we really need to protect our community hospitals. I support elder care. We need to make it easier for seniors to stay in their homes. I have 15 seconds. And we need to make it, we need to protect our people, really is what it comes down to for me. Governor Baker has repeatedly tried to push people off mass health, and we need to put them on commercial plans and get them the care that they need.
We have made tremendous progress on healthcare issues in this country and in this state with the passage of healthcare reform, but it did not go far enough. We still do not have access to quality, affordable healthcare for many people in this Commonwealth, and that's wrong, because people are entitled to a good education, to access to quality health care, to access to affordable housing, and we can do better. What happened during the passage of the bill was that the House had a much stronger and a much better bill, but the Senate had a much weaker bill that was influenced more by the healthcare sector, which is a powerful lobby in the Commonwealth. And so we need a single-payer system that enables everyone to have access to quality, affordable health care, and I strongly believe it's a human right, and that we can do better in this Commonwealth, because about almost 50% of the state budget goes to healthcare and healthcare services. We have the most expensive healthcare system in the world, but we do not have the best healthcare system in the world, not even close. And we can do better.
Joe?
When I was at National Priorities Project, we crunched the numbers for the Affordable Care Act, and that gave advocates and activists the tools they needed to make the powerful case to support President Obama's plan. We also talked with allies and crunched the numbers for single payer, and I went out on the road with the nurses to help make the case in local communities for why single payer is absolutely the way to go. And at Move On, we should applaud single payer. And at Move On, most recently, I defended the Affordable Care Act from Trump's attacks. So yes, I support single payer, I support paid family medical leave, I support nurses' limits, the patient limits that nurses are trying to set. I want to talk just for a moment on a bill, it's S610. And so that was a victory. People are calling that a victory, but I just want to call our attention to a couple of things. So the bill is about a study to determine whether or not single payer is going to be effective in the Commonwealth. And yes, studies, I believe in studies. I was a researcher, I believe in studies, but let me say that everyone needs to pay attention to two things. How that study gets set up, right? Because the assumptions they're going to make at the beginning of that study will determine the end of it. And we have to decide together and push our lawmakers to decide what kind of data they're going to collect. So right now it's a 3-year study. So if I got into office, which I hope I do, I'm going to make sure they take retroactive data so that we don't wait 3 years to learn what we already know about single payer.
David?
Well, this is one of the areas where I would have to absolutely do a substantial amount of research and learning to improve my knowledge of the area. I do support single payer generally. I think that there are obviously going to be some huge complexities when it comes to that, adopting it on the state level. But I would be very interested to bring that about to the degree that we can. For the Commonwealth and for the benefit of all. I personally have been on Mass Health. I was in a difficult situation after graduating from high school, and the state was there for me, and I really appreciate that, and I think that that those services need to be available. I believe that we have amongst the best healthcare in the world here, and that people from all over the world come to Massachusetts to go to our hospitals and to receive health care. So I think that our laws and our institutions should reflect that excellence, and we need to make that available for everyone.
Well, when I think of legislative leadership on the issue of health care, I think of Representative Peter Kokot, who right up to the end of his life, he was the chair of the healthcare financing, the Joint Healthcare Financing Committee. And he was an example of where legislative leadership matters, and this is one of these issues. We all agree. We want single payer. We all know the merits. The question is, how do you do it? And I just have a couple of ideas to suggest to you in addition to what you've heard already. First of all, if the legislature doesn't do it, then I think the people are going to organize to put it on the ballot. Ultimately, the same way they're doing for the minimum wage, for paid family and medical leave, and other important issues. The legislature shouldn't wait until that happens. They need to show leadership. To get something like this done, which would be a transformational change in our state, it's my belief we need to organize inside the State House and outside the State House. I hope that someone like me with municipal experience, in fact, the Northampton City Council also enacted a resolution in favor of Medicare for all, so I have a record on this. But I would work locally. I would work with activists, I would work with cities and towns to make as much progress as we can. I think ultimately a regional solution is something that's interesting to me as well, having kind of economy of scale in New England. And finally, let me just point out, there's a major reason why we can't get single payer. It's the power of the healthcare lobby, and we need campaign finance reform and clean elections for that and many other reasons in Massachusetts.
All right. Our next question is coming from the Gender Sexuality Alliance.
Hi, I'm Liam McBride. The Massachusetts Gender Identity Anti-Discrimination Veto Referendum will be on the ballot this fall. This is just one piece of a larger statewide and nationwide conversation we're having about protections for the LGBTQ+ community. What should Massachusetts be doing as a state for our LGBTQ+ citizens, and how will you work to bring about those changes?
We're starting with Chelsea.
As a commissioner on the Hampshire Franklin Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, I've had the opportunity to go to Beacon Hill and lobby for issues that are important to us. And one of the most recent bills that has been up has been the Healthy Youth Act. And that act is designed to ensure that there is inclusive and comprehensive and medically accurate a curriculum in schools. And that would be, I think, a really important first step is giving students language and room and latitude to be who they are and to learn about different expressions of gender and sexuality and healthy relationships and consent. And I think educating people from school all the way up will help to build a better culture and a better society that we want to live in.
I'm glad you asked the question because generally I don't favor amending the Constitution unless it's absolutely necessary. But in this case, I would support two amendments to the Constitution. One, to prohibit discrimination based on LGBTQ. And the second would be an equal rights amendment so that it would automatically be unconstitutional to pay a woman less than a man to do the same job. I think, our democracy is based on the principles of equality of opportunity, on fairness, liberty, and justice for all. But those are ideals that we need to constantly work and fight to live up to. And it's up to all of us to speak out against inequality, to fight for justice, to stand up for what we believe is right. And I got into government because I believe that it's important for all of us to do something, whatever we can, to fight to make our communities, our state, and our nation a better place for all people.
In terms of LGBTQ rights, we have to join together and defeat the transgender ballot initiative. We have to do it. So, as a member of the queer community, I know what it's like to be walking down the street with my wife and be in a place that's not safe and quickly take my hand away so that our kids won't see something ugly or won't hear something ugly coming from someone who's, motivated by bigotry. That doesn't happen here in Massachusetts. That doesn't happen especially in Northampton, I should say, where we are very fortunate to live in a place that is embracing of every kind of family. But that happens elsewhere. And this ballot initiative seeks to marginalize our transgender community to such an extent. It is mirroring, as you know, I'm sure, what's happening elsewhere, like North Carolina. We must stop it now. It is essential that we do that. I feel as a member of the queer community, it's my responsibility to stand up and say that, but it's everybody's responsibility. We cannot legislate and demand that people choose a restroom that doesn't feel right for them. That's just not okay. It never can or it never will be in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to do everything that we possibly can to protect all people. And at the state level, we should make sure and do an exhaustive review to make sure that there aren't any of these forms of discrimination in our laws and in any sorts of bills that are brought forth. The job of the state senator is going to be important in this, and there's a lot that we can do to increase protections. But I think also there's going to be just a huge amount of advocacy that has to go on between our elected state officials and our elected federal officials, because that's where this is all really taking place. We've done a great job in Massachusetts, and things have progressed dramatically, really in an incredible way on the national level, but we are, I think, now again under threat and under fire from the Trump administration and from the judges that Trump is appointing. So we can't just act like it's that we've won and that this is over, because it's not. So we're going to have to keep fighting, and we're going to have to run for elected office.
Well, we have an anti-discrimination law in Massachusetts, and around 2016, there was an effort to amend it to extend protections in matters of public accommodation. Yes, restrooms, but also restaurants, public transportation, public halls like this, to everyone on the basis, or regardless of gender identity. And what I saw was a governor who was ultimately came around, as he sometimes does, because I think he tends to put his finger in the air and see which way the wind is blowing. So I mean, you might forget he lives in Massachusetts, I'm not sure, but he ultimately came around, but he resisted it for a long time. He did the same thing when we proposed bringing refugees from Syria and other countries into Massachusetts. He resisted it first, and he came around. But on this issue, public accommodations, a crucial civil rights issue, I was aghast that he was so resistant. What it took was the legislature doing it anyway. And so here you have a group of people who want to be legislators. I think you need to make sure they have the courage of their convictions to push, even when they may have political pushback in a place like Beacon Hill. Northampton actually updated our non-discrimination policy in 2016 before the legislature acted to say we're not going to do that in Northampton. And I was proud of that. So as your state senator, I will continue to fight for those rights and civil rights for everybody.
Our next question is coming from the Pioneer Valley students. Oh, wait, no?
Sorry, I'm on.
I'm so sorry.
I agree with so much of what's already been said, and I guess rather than repeating some of the same things, except reinforcing again what Joe said about defeating the transgender bill, it's anybody who has been with someone who has difficulty with someone else in the LGBT community, they're afraid. It's a difference to them. They don't understand it, and they're afraid. Now, luckily in Northampton, I grew up here. I've watched how this city and the citizenry has changed. Why? Because they know somebody. Everybody knows somebody who's belonged to that community here in the city of Northampton. It makes them less afraid. It makes them more comfortable. So what I would really say is what we can do to make this better is many of the students here, you know people. You may be one somebody in that community yourself, feel free to try to get out to people that are not used to you and share your stories. Have your friends go home, let them know that, and you go home to your parents and share the stories and share your love for the people that you have around me. That's how it's going to change. It changes because people are afraid, and we've got to stop making people afraid of difference when we're all just human beings trying to get by and get through our lives.
Thank you, Steve. Now a question from the Pioneer Valley Students for Gun Control.
So once again, I'm today back at it with another question. So last Thursday, Northampton schools went into lockdown after a man at JFK Middle School showed up with 2 air rifles. Fortunately, our administrators and police officers handled the situation well. But during the event, everyone, teachers, administrators, and I can attest, students, were freaked out because school shootings have become all too common, and it might have been us next. On the same day, the Massachusetts Senate passed an extreme risk protective order bill, which would keep guns out of the hands of people deemed by the court to be a danger to themselves or to others. What will you do beyond what is already covered by existing gun control legislation to keep our communities safe?
And we're starting with Dave.
That's a good question because in Massachusetts, we have some of the strongest and best gun control laws in the nation. We have been ahead of the curve on this issue for many, many years. And that's the reason why we also have one of the fewest gun homicide rates and gun death rates in the country. This is an issue that I've worked on, basically since I graduated from college, having worked for Senator Kennedy on the assault weapons ban and working in the Justice Department on the implementation of the Brady Act, so that we could have some common sense gun control in the nation. Because what happens is that even though we have really strong gun control laws in Massachusetts, guns come from other states like Georgia that has very lax gun control laws, and people can go to a gun show and buy, dozens of firearms and then drive them up the highway and bring them into our communities. So this is an issue that really needs to be addressed at the national level. I think that we're doing a good job in Massachusetts on the issue of gun control, and I think that we need leaders who will stand up to the gun lobby and who will affect more positive change at the national level.
I got the robocall about my kids' school, Jackson Street, being locked down. And the fear that went through my body, I will never forget. I have 2 ideas for how we can build on the already great successes about gun safety ledge in Massachusetts. One is there is innovative technology available now that will make guns more safe. We have to legislate that technology. Gun makers in Massachusetts, if you're going to make a gun in Massachusetts, you have to make it safer. That's one. The second is Attorney General Morin is really pushing for conceal and carry laws. I would back Maura Healey's brave leadership around this. And I will just say that I came to the gun issue when I was at Move On, and it was after a school shooting when then President Obama said to the nation, is there anyone out there, a common sense gun owner, who I can work with? And I thought to myself, I wonder what I can do about this. So I organized, and at Move On, we have such scale, right? 5 million members. I found 37,000 common sense gun owners. And I took 12 of them to Washington, D.C., and we worked with House and Senate members and with the members of the Obama administration. And we helped President Obama have the political space through mounting a strategic campaign to pass an executive order. And when he passed it, gun owners were standing behind him. And that's the kind of bridge building I want to do on this issue going forward.
I'd support the bill, and I would also support more strict gun restrictions, to be honest with you. I don't care if we were the most strict in the nation. Personally, I would support just taking away all the guns. I mean, I don't, I mean, maybe you have to repeal the Second Amendment, but it actually says something about a well-regulated militia, and I think people are just taking it really out of context in a lot of ways. So, I mean, we can do a lot in that regard, but as my colleagues have said, we do need to sort of pursue it on the national level. We should restore the original assault weapons ban at the national level, because, of course, we don't have militarized state borders and border patrols in that regard, so they can come freely, and there's only really so much that we can do. But I would support some changes locally. You know, maybe there is stuff that we can do to make schools safer, more security. Perhaps that doesn't necessarily involve arming teachers, but having some strong security measures in that regard, I think, would be appropriate if people are appropriately trained. And also, we have to address mental health. I think that is at the nexus of a lot of our societal issues, and that's my response to the special question. Thank you.
I think the people in this room, or the young people of our city and many communities across Massachusetts, were the leaders on this recently. I marched with many of you, thousands of people who started here and went all the way to the steps of City Hall for a Pioneer Valley March for Our Lives. And you made a very clear demand that you wanted action on gun violence prevention, and you wanted it immediately, and you're right. I know the focus was state and federal, but in response, I thought it would be strange, actually, if the City Council didn't acknowledge it. So we did. I actually worked with the Youth Commission in the city of Northampton to endorse several different pieces of gun control. Let me tell you what they are. First was the Extreme Risk Protective Order. I'm happy that passed. Another one I think we really need is to expand universal background checks in Massachusetts. There's a loophole right now. If you're interested in learning about this, go to the Giffords Law Center, the Gabby Giffords Foundation, and you'll see that we have a problem with, people can get a firearm license in Massachusetts, and the period of time can elapse, and they can buy a gun, and in between, they can fall into a prohibited category, and they shouldn't have a gun. We need point-of-sale universal background checks. And finally, I feel very strongly about this. We should divest our state pension fund of fossil fuels, just as we have of big tobacco. And we should do the same thing of people who make guns. There's no reason for tax money to be funding companies that make guns or ammunition.
I agree also with Dave down here that this is a national issue, and it's really difficult because we are talking constitutionally. I don't own a gun, but I was in the military and I learned how to shoot a gun. I also have worked with a lot of people who own a lot of guns. The idea that people need to own an assault rifle is ridiculous. But as a compromise, if somebody is wishing to have an assault rifle, it stays at a range, because the only thing you can do with that is supposedly target shooting. You're not going to kill squirrels with it. So if people feel like it's their constitutional right to have an assault rifle, it should be locked in a safe at a shooting range, and it never leaves there. The other thing about it all is and it is such a national issue because anybody can get the gun and come over the border. When I was really young, they stopped doing it shortly after I entered the school system. But we used to hide under our desks because, geez, the Russians might drop bombs on us. And of course, we were scared, but we were confused. I think about the kids that were at JFK, at the other schools, all the schools where there's a lockdown and you're just there for all that time. It amazes me, and we need to make sure that the more school counselors not only address the trauma of everybody sitting in that room, but also that person that feels so marginalized that they would do something like that. We need more counseling in our schools.
Thank you for this question. I'm glad you brought it up. I also joined in for the March for Our Lives, and I was proud to do so, and I was so grateful to the student organizers for making that happen. With the Badass Activist group, we actually had a whole long list of sign ideas, and it was for people who wanted to make their signs to join in the march. And we had pages and pages of sign ideas for people, and it just broke my heart that we have to continuously demand for sanity. And it's just unacceptable that children in our communities are being terrorized by gun violence. I recently heard that there's a Twinkle Twinkle Little Star variation being taught to children to learn about how to go through a lockdown. As a mother of 3, this kills me. This is terrifying that our children are they have to be subjected to increased security so that they can just learn and go to school and be in community. So I am very supportive of the act relative to universal background checks and making it much harder for people to get guns.
Thank you. So we will be asking the same final question as was asked in the House debate, which is, what is one issue that you don't think gets enough attention in state legislature, and how would you address that issue as our state senator? And we will begin with Joe.
Oh, this is a tough one. So I have a bunch, but I'm going to go with economic inequality. And here's why. So it's really hard right now for parents and guardians to trust that our kids are going to do just a little bit better than we did, right? The stakes families are facing are enormously high. Right now, Massachusetts has one of the highest economic inequality rates in the nation, right up there with New York, Washington, D.C., and Connecticut. Now, that's in large part because of the price of our housing and rents, but not entirely. And so what I really want us to do in the state legislature is look at economic inequality writ large. Look at it through, of course, a gender lens, of course, an age lens, of course, a racial justice lens. And we've talked about paid family medical leave, and we've talked about health care, and they're all part of an economic inequality busting package. But I also want to say that I strongly support the Earned Income Tax Credit, which returns money back to poor and working families. And that money goes right into our economy and lifts everybody up, especially these families. And I really support a $15 minimum wage. It's an essential piece of legislation. Again, I believe that we have to bring it in smartly, but when it comes in, when we win, families that are struggling to feed their children and making hard decisions between prescription drugs and how to heat the house, they will no longer have to carry that burden, and then our entire economy will lift up with them. Thank you.
As I said earlier, I think that mental health is really an issue that is overlooked at the state level and the national level. It seems to really be at the center of a lot of our societal ills, whether it's violent crime, as we've discussed already. I mean, you constantly hear the rhetoric on the right of mental health being the problem when it comes to gun violence. I mean, it is a problem. It's not the whole problem. There are obviously guns involved, but mental health is there. And I think when, it's the street crime or drugs or dropping out of school or just, not advancing or succeeding in society as one would like, these are often rooted in underlying mental health issues, which probably could be addressed if the social safety net was stronger and more readily accessible to all. So I think that mental health absolutely has to be dealt with as a health issue, and of course, with this opioid crisis, we have to wrap our heads around it, because it is killing people. It's killed my friends. This year, I lost somebody. And it is just absolutely out of control, and it must be addressed with legislation and with dollars from the state.
Corporate tax breaks. This subject comes up frequently in our state. They often do studies, and then the studies go to the basement of the State House, where all of us will start, by the way. But even below us, there are studies collecting dust about the corporate tax breaks we give out to specific industries in our state. And I have to say, this is not just a mathematical thing that drives me a little crazy. What frustrates me is we haggle over whether we're going to give regional transit authorities in the Commonwealth $8 million, $10 million that they need to connect people to affordable housing, to employment, to health care. And at the same time, we effectively give, for example, Hollywood $25 million to film the remake of Ghostbusters. And that's just the most sensational one. There are billions of dollars here. I was very pleased that the Senate's Ways and Means budget actually had a recommendation in it to create a standing committee to review tax expenditures, as they call them, or tax breaks. I will fight for that, and I will fight to build support for it with my colleagues on the House side too, because we need to do that. When we talk about equity and raising revenue, it affects real people's lives. I grew up in affordable housing in Amherst. You know, I want to invest in affordable housing. I want to invest in transportation. I want to invest in our schools and our communities. Let's do it. Let's be serious about it. And I hope that if you put your faith in me, I have the opportunity to move that forward. Thank you very much.
This one comes close to home. I spend every day dealing with people who are barely making it. Think about it. We give people with disabilities SSI. SSI of $750 comes from the Social Security office. The state of Massachusetts supplements with maybe $114. If we don't have enough affordable housing, we don't have free Medicare for all, what happens with that money? We give them little pittances of SNAP benefits, we give them a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And then if they commit fraud by switching a SNAP benefit with somebody to get smokes because they're addicted to cigarettes, we're going to punish them by taking away their money. This is a crazy system. It's a crazy system. Nobody can live off of $750 a month. I don't care where they live. If I became a state senator, the first thing I would do is take that $114 and jump it way up to get people to at least 175% of the federal poverty level. Thank you.
I would like to work on homelessness. There are far too many people that are experiencing homelessness, that are extremely vulnerable, that are in transient situations, that are living out of cars, that are living in boxes, etc. I would like to address the root causes of homelessness. I would like to work on affordable housing. I would like to strengthen our create more job creation programs, apprenticeship programs, of course work on single payer healthcare, even debt-free college, of course food stamps, criminal justice reform. I think that when we see someone who's that vulnerable, there's so many pieces that all connect to that issue and that moment, and I would love to work on that.
Income stratification is the gravest threat to our democracy today. We live in a nation where 1% of society owns 40% of the wealth in this nation. They own more than the bottom 90%. A democracy cannot survive without a vibrant middle class. I was born in a country, Cali, Colombia, where there is no middle class. There's rich and there's very poor, and most people are very poor. An economy can't survive like that because an economy is driven by consumer spending. And if you don't have money to spend, then your economy is going to tank. So to me, income stratification is a critical issue, and it can be addressed easily by fair tax policy. We need to tax millionaires, and we need to tax corporations in a fair way, because the middle class is getting killed in this country, and we need to change that.
Thank you. So now we are going to move to closing statements. There will be 2 minutes in length, and we are starting with David.
Okay, well, thanks again, everyone, to the organizers and the sponsors for putting this on, and to all of you for coming. And to my colleagues up here, I really appreciate the opportunity to be up here with you and to run for this office, which will be filled, and I think that the district will be well served regardless of the outcome of this Democratic primary. My name is David Morin, and I am asking for your vote for the Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester Senate seat. If you elect me, and I am so privileged as to be your senator, I will slap those state legislator license plates on my 1997 Toyota Corolla and drive it down to the State House to be your senator. I am not taking any money from anyone, not from Wall Street, not from special interests, not from my colleagues up here on the stage, not from the organizers of this event, not from the political elite, as it happens. I'm only putting a small amount of my own money and a great amount of my hard work into this campaign. And if I am your senator, I will do so with the utmost and highest ethical standard possible. And I look forward to meeting you all. I look forward to more fora and debates such as this. Thank you all again. I really appreciate your time.
Well, let me also thank the organizers of this event and also my fellow candidates. It's great to be able to engage in the vibrant democracy that we cherish here in Western Massachusetts. Tonight you heard about many different issues. You heard about the urgency to act on climate change. You heard about the need for gun violence prevention legislation in Massachusetts. You heard about the need to change the way we fund our public schools and make sure we have equality in our society. On many of those issues in a local capacity, as city councilor and city council president in Northampton, I've taken stances and I've taken action on those issues. I believe in public service. I believe in the political process as a way to make our society better. And I want to continue that and bring that philosophy with me and represent you in the state Senate. When you hear about all these issues, you're also left with this feeling of the enormity of them, the enormity of the challenges that we face, and it drives home the problem that we have Senator Stan Rosenberg has stepped down, that Representative Peter Kokott has tragically left us, that Representative Ellen Story has previously retired, and I have a concern for our communities, but also for the ideals that matter to us. I love this part of the world with all my heart, and I want to be your state senator to fight for Western Massachusetts, to fight for our communities, and to fight for the things that we believe in. And I believe with all my heart that if we work together, we actually can build a better society through the political process. I think we need to find a state senator who will be ready on day one and can use the legislative process to get results for Western Massachusetts. I promise to do that as your next state senator, and thank you very much for coming tonight.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the groups, and thank you for the other candidates. This is an honor to be on the panel with these folks. You might wonder why you should write in Steve Connor for State Senate. I'll spend the next few months making my case. I believe I bring valuable experiences and will bring them to the State House. I worked as a cook in Head Start and daycare center, making sure all kids had fresh and nutritious food as they deserve. I also worked as an advocate for children with special needs to get the educational services they deserve. I worked with disabled adults to help get them the opportunities that they deserve. I work with veterans and families now, aging veterans, veterans returning with Agent Orange and traumatic brain injuries, veterans returning with military sexual trauma, homeless veterans, so many homeless veterans. Not all their stories are heroic, but they all are deserving. And I work every day to see that they get the support and services and benefits they deserve. I want to bring my experiences working with government and nonprofit agencies to help shape the future that you folks deserve. I came of age when Earth Day was first established, and I joined what I think was the first social justice club formed at JFK Middle School, the Ecology and Conservation Club. That was the start of my environmentalism. If I am elected to serve our region in Boston, I pledge to increase our state's use of renewable and sustainable energy in Massachusetts. Massachusetts can be a leader among states in this area, and Western Massachusetts can be a leader for the rest of Massachusetts. I would like to thank all the student leaders who participated in organizing this forum. I would also especially like to thank those organizers that organized the Spring's March for our Lives event. Your continued leadership and participation will be needed if we are to keep Massachusetts one of the safest states in the country when it comes to gun violence. I pledge to work with you to strengthen common sense regulations around gun ownership because you should not be afraid of being in school. Thank you.
There are some who say that I should stop telling my story and only talk about policy, but I believe we need both. I share my story because I believe that our experiences inform our advocacy and our activism, and because it matters who represents us in the legislature. When I fight for priorities like education equity or single-payer healthcare, environmental justice, and strengthening our social safety net, I do so with my personal experiences and my challenges, and with my passion and conviction. I fundamentally believe that state government has the power to lift up all marginalized communities, to provide every child with a great education, establish free public higher education, and to break down systems of oppression. But to achieve these monumental goals, we need to have authentic advocates whose lived experiences are impossible to ignore. We also need leaders who will repeatedly say, Black lives matter, Muslim lives matter, trans lives matter, immigrant lives matter. We need advocates who are willing to call for higher taxes on the wealthy, and we need legislators who know what it means to struggle. Thank you.
You are not going to find a lot of daylight between the candidates on the issues. The critical question that you need to ask yourself is, who has the experience to be the most effective advocate for this district? I've spent most of my adult life working in government to help people because I believe that the purpose of life is working to make the world a better place for all and to inspire others to do the same. Robert Kennedy said, "Few will have the greatness to bend history, but each of us can work to change a small portion of the events, and in the total, all of these acts will be written in the history of this generation." I was first inspired by my parents who adopted me as a baby while they were living in Cali, Colombia. They raised me and my siblings with two overriding values, the value of education and the value of helping people who are less fortunate. My parents inspired me through their examples when my father served on the school committee in Amherst and when my mother worked on numerous campaigns in town. My mother inspired me when she spent Saturdays cooking huge trays of food to serve at homeless shelters, even though she had 5 young children at home. I wanted to tell you a story, but I don't think that I have time. But I did go back to Colombia, and I remember seeing 2 kids about my age who were throwing newspapers on the sidewalk, and I asked my father what they were doing, and he told me that some people in Colombia are so poor they can't afford to support their children, and that those boys lived in the streets and that they were going to sleep in the newspapers. And I looked up at him like he was crazy because I just couldn't believe it. But sure enough, the boys jumped into the pile of newspapers, closed their eyes, and went to sleep. I will never forget that, because to me that could have been me. So I feel I have a responsibility to work to try to give other people the opportunities that I've been given to try to make a change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone for organizing this. Thank you to the student leaders who give us hope. I agree that the region, right now, our district in this region is in the midst of a seismic shift. And I agree that there are lawmakers who will be missed. But I do see this moment as an opportunity for great regional transformation. I know that if I have the privilege of going to Beacon Hill as your representative in the state Senate, I know I will have to hit the ground from day one and build back power and lead for the benefit of every person in this district. And that is something I very much hope to do with your vote. I have a moment that defines me, and it actually starts before the litany of milestones that I shared with you in the beginning. And it actually is when I was age 11, and I'd like to share this story, and I've never said this in public. I was living for a time with my aunt, who's a sister of St. Joseph. We were in a convent in Brooklyn, and you just don't mess with the nuns, I'll tell you. And my sister and I were there, and there was a doorbell, and we ran to the door, and I opened it up, and there was a young woman standing in front of me, and we were about the same height. And she had 2 little kids in her hands, and they were crying, and she looked distressed, and the nuns came in, and they ushered her into the living room, and in moments they dispatched healthcare and education and childcare, and we found out that this woman had been arrested for trying to feed her children. She tried to steal food to feed her children, and at that moment, my world fell apart. At that moment, I thought, nothing makes sense. I'm living a middle-class life with 2 good parents, and what's happening in the world? And that's what set me on this trajectory where I've worked every single day of my adult life to try to make the world a little bit better. And I want now to take all of the experience I've gained, all of the leadership I have, and my vision for the kind of transformative democracy that we can have in this region, and I want to bring it into government, that I know how it works, and I want to work in government for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you to the candidates for coming. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, David. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to the candidates for the House. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, Diana. Thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you to the youth groups who came. Thank you to the Democrats Club, to the Environmental Club. Thank you to GSA. Thank you to Tiger Valley Students for Gun Control. I think I'm missing one. Feminist Collective. Thank you, Feminist Collective. There's also a forum with all of the Senate candidates on June 20th. It's a Wednesday from 7 to 9 at JFK. So if you're interested in going to that, you can go to that. There will be flyers, I think, outside. Someone's handing them out. Sorry we kept you past 8:30. Have a good night.